and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Premier League winning managers have come and gone over the decades, but it is not often that a single manager is able not just to win the Premier League, but also influence the playing style of teams across the league. In 2016-17, Antonio Conte and his Chelsea side were able to achieve just this, waltzing to the title with 93 points, winning a then record 30 matches in one season, as well as a then record 13 games in a row, and Conte being crowned the manager of the season. But how did Conte achieve this, and what were his tactics? In this video we take a look. Formations are always a big point of conversation in football, and at times we place too much weight on their importance, but in the same breath, we can be too dismissive of them. But the 16-17 season was one of the times where the formation changed the side completely. In the first 6 matches, Conte used a 4-2-3-1 that looked like this, and the results were mixed, with 3 wins, 1 draw and 2 losses, and Chelsea found themselves lingering in 8th. But the change came when they were 3-0 down in the first half against Arsenal, and Conte shifted to a back 3 for the second half and never looked back. And Conte's 3-4-3 was so effective that before Chelsea had started using it, a back 3 had only been used 10 times that season. But after Chelsea switched to a back 3, it was then used 130 times over the rest of the season, with 31 of those being Chelsea. But teams like City, Spurs, and Arsenal also contributed to this. And Conte's first choice in the 3-4-3 looked like this, with other regular contributors being Fabregas, Willian, and Terry. It is evident how Conte got the best of several players by changing their roles. Moses, a decent winger, was much better at wing-back, and Alonso, who was a questionable left-back in a 4, excelled as a wing-back. David Luiz was the butt of many jokes when he played in a 2, but was spectacular in a back 3. Azpilicueta was a versatile player in that we had seen him play on the right side and on the left, but making him a third centre-back was another stroke of genius from Conte. In Diego Costa, Chelsea had a physical presence who could occupy both centre-backs whilst being decent in the air, meaning that when teams pressed them high, the long ball was always an option, with 2 floaters ready to pick up the second ball. So, teams tended to drop deeper to close that space, freeing Chelsea to build short as they preferred. And in open play, the back 3 made them difficult to press. A front 3 would mean that the wing-backs were the easy outlets, whilst a front 1 or 2 would both be easily outnumbered. So, as teams dropped deeper, as the structure had made them harder to press, it meant that Chelsea's centre-backs got more time on the ball. And this allowed us to see the very best of Luiz, who, due to having more cover around him, could express his ability on the ball a lot more. Again, this could be in the shape of longer balls, looking to find runners in behind the high line when there was space. And it should be noted, while they were by no means a long ball side, building deeper often drew teams higher up the pitch, and Chelsea were always ready to play into the space, making the most of Costa's movement. We would also see this when Fabregas was on the pitch, as he often looked to release Costa over the top. We also saw Luiz, or one of the wide centre-backs, being willing to step into the midfield at times in support, as playing with only a double pivot could mean that they were often outnumbered. But when they looked to progress through the centre more, the wing-backs pushed high and wide to function as wingers, and this would free up the inside forwards. Pedro was much more static in his movements, mainly moving up and down the half space. However, Hazard enjoyed a much freer role, meaning that he could drop into the 10 position, move over to the right, or even into this left half space to pick up the ball deeper, and his on-the-ball ability meant that he could then break the second line with a dribble. And Conte and Matic were both at their peak, making this one of the most solid double pivots that a manager could wish for. Individually, each was capable of protecting the space alone as a single pivot, so pairing them up gave them even more stability. And of the two, Matic was given a bit more attacking license, with Conte more often covering, especially as Azpilicueta would be comfortable moving higher into the midfield. And his presence in this region also facilitated Hazard to move around a lot more, and in this season we saw a different side of Matic, with his attacking instinct coming to the fore as he racked up 7 assists. Playing it into Costa was also another option, and he would then often look to combine with the inside forwards who always looked to stay in close proximity to him. The central play was also assisted by having Hazard and Pedro in the half spaces. Their positioning would often force the fullbacks narrow, and Moses and Alonso moving high early were big threats. So if the fullbacks moved wide to cover them, the inside men would be free. But if they stayed narrow, the wingback was then free, and the opponent's wide men could look to drop deep to track at times. The problem, however, would be that this would leave a lot of space in this region that the wide centre-back or a midfielder could move into, and with the added time, they could get their heads up and try to create. But for the most part, Chelsea preferred to build up through the flanks, as they could naturally create wide overloads. Down the right, this would involve Conte moving across as well as Pedro, meaning they would now have a wide diamond. This would subsequently draw opponents across to compensate, and with Alonso providing the width on the far side, it would provide the perfect opportunity to switch and get in across. They could also overload the left-hand side, with one major difference. Azpilicueta would move into the midfield, and when this happened, it forced the opposition's midfielder into a choice. If he stayed more central to track his man, there would be more gaps to exploit down the left-hand side. But if Azpilicueta could receive and advance, they would now look to overload the left back and the left winger higher up the pitch. And Pedro was exceptional receiving in this region, able to combine infield with Costa, attack the byline for the cutback, but he is also extremely two-footed, so could cut in and have a shot on his left foot. At the same time, when Moses received wide, due to his days as a winger, he was more versatile and dangerous in 1-versus-1 situations, so he could beat his man to get in an excellent cross into one of the forwards. Now, let's quickly touch on the defensive end of things. In the transition phases, Conte and Matic were excellent at covering any space created. Through the centre, both had the ability to shift across. But it is important to note that when Chelsea had been attacking down the flanks, when the wingbacks had pushed higher up, the pivot would move across to cover, making them harder to penetrate. But in general open play, Chelsea were not a high pressing side at all. In fact, 12 of the 20 sides were generally higher pressing than them. Instead, they preferred to sit in a deeper 5-4-1, making them difficult to break down, especially with the previously mentioned double pivot. Playing with a back three meant that when teams were forced wide, the three men would be able to deal with the crosses. And where in a 2, Luis had struggled at times with positioning and decision making, the extra man meant that there was less defensive onus on him, which allowed him to be much more composed. The 2016-17 Chelsea side is statistically one of the best Premier League winning sides of all time, and a lot of the credit has to go to Conte and his tactics. But what are your memories of this Chelsea side? Drop it down below. And if you want even more content whilst helping to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/footballmadesimple. You'll get early access to videos, exclusive videos, as well as access to the upcoming FMS video podcast. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.